Millionaire's twins were blind, until Black Maid rubbed their eyes and something shocking happened. Liam, do you ever wonder what the sky looks like? The quiet question came from the lips of Elias Montgomery, a 12-year-old boy whose world had always been wrapped in shadow. His twin brother Liam sat beside him on the wide balcony of their father's mansion, his face tilting upward as though he could see through the blindness that bound them both. The twins had been blind since birth. Born into wealth as sons of the reclusive billionaire Charles Montgomery III, they lived in luxury but carried the weight of a silent sorrow. Marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled without their knowing, and gardens filled with flowers they could only smell but never see, it was all wealth without wonder. Liam reached out, placing his hand over Elias. I think the sky feels like freedom, Liam whispered, but I wish I could know for sure. And it was in that moment, two boys bound by darkness yet yearning for light, that their story truly began. Down below, in the quiet corners of the Montgomery estate, walked Naomi Caldwell, a 28-year-old maid of Black American descent. Naomi had worked for the Montgomery family for only a few months, but she had already seen enough to understand one truth. In that mansion, money was plenty, but love was scarce. The billionaire father was rarely home, often consumed by business ventures in cities across the globe. The mother, Evangeline, lived more like a ghost than a wife, trapped in her own world of luxury retreats and charity events. And the twins, they were left to the care of hired tutors, doctors, and house staff. Naomi noticed something others ignored. Though the boys had every toy, every comfort money could buy, what they longed for most was something far more priceless: human connection. Naomi had grown up on the south side of Baltimore, raised in hardship, knowing what it meant to hunger not just for food but for belonging. Perhaps that was why she was drawn to the twins. Every evening after her shift cleaning the upper hallways, she would pause by the balcony, listening to their conversations. They spoke of dreams they'd never seen. The shape of clouds. The shade of green in the grass. The sparkle of stars in the night. Naomi would bite her lip, aching with the weight of their innocence. To her, their blindness wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. They had been denied not just sight but the love and presence of parents who should have nurtured them. One night, as she tucked them into bed, a task usually left to rotating nannies, Elias suddenly asked her, Naomi, what's your favorite color? She froze. It was such a simple question, but the gravity behind it shattered her. Blue, she whispered, kneeling between their beds. The kind of blue that makes you believe the world is bigger than your pain. Neither boy said a word, but Naomi heard Liam's breath hitch. And in that silence she understood something. Maybe she was meant to be in their lives for more than just dusting bookshelves and polishing silverware. Charles Montgomery was a man with everything yet nothing. Newspapers hailed him as a financial genius, but behind closed doors he carried guilt like a chain. His son's blindness was, to him, a scar on his legacy. He loved them in his way, but that love was tainted with shame. To avoid confronting his failure, he buried himself in work, leaving others to raise his children. He could buy cures, experimental treatments, and world-renowned doctors, but nothing had restored their sight. Each failed attempt only deepened his detachment. But fate has a way of using the least expected to do the greatest things. It was a stormy night when it began. Thunder rolled through the Montgomery estate, lightning flashing against the tall windows. The twins huddled together, frightened. Their world was already dark, but storms made it feel even smaller. Naomi entered their room, humming softly. Don't be afraid, storms can be loud, but they also mean the earth is being washed clean. She sat beside them, placing one hand gently over Liam's eyes and the other over Elias. It was a gesture of comfort, nothing more, yet something stirred. Both boys gasped. Naomi, what's happening? Elias whispered. Her heart raced. What do you mean? I see light, just a little, like a flicker, Liam said, his voice trembling. Naomi pulled her hands back instantly, her chest tightening. She thought it was imagination, the desperate longing of boys who wanted to see so badly that their minds created illusions. But when she returned her palms to their eyes, the twins both let out a cry of astonishment. It's brighter now. I think I saw something move, Elias said, tears streaming down his face. Naomi was speechless. She wasn't a doctor, wasn't a healer. She was just a maid. And yet, in that moment, something impossible had happened. Over the following nights, the boys begged Naomi to do it again. Each time she pressed her hands gently to their eyes, they described more shapes, outlines, faint colors. At first, she dismissed it as their imagination. But when they both described the same things, the flickering of the chandelier, the pale color of the curtains, Naomi realized this was no dream. But she was terrified. If the Montgomerys discovered this, what would they think? She was just an employee, a maid whose contract could be terminated with the snap of a finger. They might accuse her of trickery or worse. Yet how could she deny the boys' hope? Each night, Naomi told the twins stories of her own childhood, of running barefoot in the summer grass, of watching sunsets from the rooftop of her grandmother's house, of painting skis she could never forget. She painted pictures with her words, and as her hands pressed gently against their closed eyes, it was as though her memories became theirs. And slowly, piece by piece, the twins began to see, not fully, not yet, but shadows sharpened into shapes and darkness began to surrender to light. What Naomi did not know was that this secret would not remain hidden for long. What began as an act of comfort would spark curiosity, suspicion, and eventually a storm far greater than the one outside that night. Because miracles, especially those that touch the rich and powerful, never go unnoticed. And by the time the truth came out, the Montgomery mansion would no longer be just a house of wealth. It would become the stage of a story that could inspire the world. If you think this is just another tale of blindness and healing, think again. This story will break your heart, mend it, and challenge everything you believe about love, miracles, and the human spirit. Stick with it until the end and you'll discover why sometimes the most extraordinary power doesn't come from money or science or influence, but from the most unexpected soul. Naomi, can we do it again tonight? Elias asked eagerly. His small hands clutching hers. His voice carried that fragile mixture of hope and fear, the kind of tone that could make a grown woman's heart break in two. It had been 2 weeks since that stormy night when Naomi first pressed her palms against the boys' eyes. 2 weeks since they had gasped, describing flickers of light and faint colors. 2 weeks since her ordinary world had been overturned by something extraordinary. And every evening since then, the twins begged her for the same ritual. Naomi hesitated, glancing nervously at the tall mahogany door behind them. The Montgomery mansion was filled with eyes, maids, butlers, tutors, guards. Secrets weren't easy to keep in a house like this, yet the thought of denying the boys she couldn't. "All right," she whispered, lowering her hands gently over their eyes. Liam inhaled sharply. "It's brighter tonight, Naomi. I think I saw the lamp's shadow moving on the wall." Elias squeezed her wrist. "And the curtains, are they pale gold? I can almost see them." Naomi's chest tightened. She had no explanation for what was happening, but she knew one thing for certain: these boys were beginning to see, and whether miracle or mystery, it was happening through her. The Montgomery mansion, for all its grandeur, was a house divided. Charles Montgomery was absent again, conducting meetings in Zurich. Evangeline had gone to Paris for a charity gala. Their sons, though surrounded by staff, might as well have been orphans. Naomi saw it more clearly than anyone. Tutors spoke to them mechanically, doctors treated them like experiments, and the household staff kept their distance, fearing the wrath of their employers if anything went wrong. But Naomi wasn't like the others. She sat with them, laughed with them, prayed with them, and the twins clung to her not just as a maid but as the first person who made them feel truly seen. It was beautiful, it was dangerous. One evening, as Naomi guided the twins through their nightly exercises, a shadow flickered outside the door. She didn't notice it, but someone else did. It was Mrs. Delacroix, the head housekeeper. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, she prided herself on order, discipline, and loyalty to the Montgomery name. She had been in the family's service longer than Naomi had been alive. She frowned as she lingered in the hallway, listening to muffled laughter. She distinctly heard Elias exclaim, "Naomi, I saw the candlelight flicker," followed by Liam's excited, "I can see the edge of your hair, your curls." Mrs. Delacroix's lips pressed into a thin line. Blind boys claiming to see? Impossible, unless someone was filling their heads with nonsense. She walked away briskly, heels clicking against the marble floor. If Naomi was overstepping her boundaries, she would soon learn the cost. That night, Naomi lay awake in her small staff quarters, staring at the ceiling. A knot twisted in her chest. What if someone discovered her secret with the boys? What if they thought she was manipulating them, or worse, trying to make herself seem like some kind of miracle worker? She thought of her grandmother's words, whispered in the dim light of a Baltimore church years ago. Child, sometimes God uses the hands of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Naomi pressed her palms together. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't looking for attention. All she wanted was to give the boys hope. But hope, she knew, was a dangerous thing in a house where image mattered more than truth. For Liam and Elias, every day now felt like a step closer to a dream. They began to describe the world around them with growing excitement. "The garden, I think I can see the roses. They're red, aren't they?" Elias asked one afternoon as Naomi walked them outside. "Yes, sweetheart, they're the brightest red," Naomi confirmed, tears welling in her eyes. "And the sky," Liam whispered. "It's blue like you said, Naomi, I think I can almost see it." Their joy was contagious, filling Naomi with both pride and dread. Because she knew the brighter their world became, the closer they came to exposing the secret they shared. The breakthrough came unexpectedly one morning during lessons. Their tutor, a rigid man named Dr. Halbrook, placed a block puzzle before them, fully expecting failure. He had worked with them for years and had long since abandoned any faith in miracles. "Match the shapes by touch as usual," he said curtly. But Elias hesitated. He tilted his head, squinting at the table. "Dr. Halbrook, I think I see the square piece. It's right there, isn't it?" The tutor froze. "What did you say?" Elias reached forward, his hand hovering uncertainly but guided by something beyond touch. His fingers landed on the square block. Liam clapped, grinning. "He saw it. I told you, we can see now." Dr. Halbrook's face drained of color. His hands trembled as he gathered the puzzle pieces. "This is highly irregular." And just like that, whispers began. By evening, the mansion buzzed with hushed conversations. Kitchen maids whispered while chopping vegetables. Gardeners exchanged glances over trimmed hedges. Guards shook their heads in disbelief. "The blind twins they're seeing now. Impossible, must be trickery." "No, I heard it from Dr. Halbrook himself. One of them picked the right block without touching it." And inevitably the question followed. "How?" The name on everyone's lips was Naomi. Mrs. Delacroix cornered her near the laundry room the next day. "Naomi Caldwell," she said sharply, her gray eyes narrowing. "What exactly have you been doing with the boys?" Naomi's throat tightened. "Ma'am, I only take care of them, tell them stories, comfort them when they're afraid." "Comfort," Delacroix repeated coldly. "Is that what you call filling their heads with fantasies, making them believe they can see?" Naomi's eyes burned with restrained tears. "It isn't a fantasy, ma'am, they're seeing things, I don't know how, but they are." Delacroix scoffed. "Don't be absurd, you're a maid, not a miracle worker. Mark my words, girl, whatever you're doing, it ends now." But Naomi's silence told another story. She couldn't stop, not when the boys' lives were changing before her eyes. The turning point came when Charles Montgomery III returned from Europe. His arrival was always dramatic, black cars rolling through the gates, assistants carrying briefcases, the mansion snapping into rigid order. He was a tall man with a commanding presence, his silver-streaked hair and sharp suits making him look every bit the billionaire tycoon. But his eyes were cold, detached. At dinner, he noticed something strange. Elias and Liam were animated, describing things they shouldn't have been able to. "Father, your tie, it's dark blue, isn't it?" Liam asked suddenly. The room fell silent. Charles froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What did you just say?" Elias chimed in, smiling. "And the chandelier, it sparkles like stars, we can see it." The clatter of silverware against porcelain echoed like thunder. Every servant in the room bowed their heads in terror. Charles Montgomery's eyes narrowed, scanning the table until they landed on Naomi, who stood nervously in the corner. "You," he said slowly, his voice like ice, "what have you done to my sons?" Naomi's knees trembled, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to explain, but how could she? She didn't understand it herself. And yet, as Charles's piercing gaze bore into her, she knew her life and the lives of the twins were about to change forever. Because in that mansion, miracles were not celebrated, they were interrogated. And the storm had only just begun. The grand dining hall of the Montgomery estate had fallen into an uneasy silence. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting their light on the long, polished table, but no one dared look up. Charles Montgomery's icy voice cut through the air like a blade. "Explain now." Naomi froze where she stood. Her hands fidgeted nervously with the edge of her apron, her heart pounding so loud she thought everyone could hear it. The twins shifted in their seats, sensing the storm gathering over their heads. Elias broke the silence first. "Father, it's true, Naomi been helping us. When she touches our eyes, we can see at first just shadows, but now colors, shapes." Charles's jaw tightened, his sharp features hardening into something unreadable. He turned his gaze on Naomi. "Is this true?" Naomi swallowed, her voice barely steady. "Sir, I don't know how to explain it, but yes, they've been seeing things I've only—" "Enough!" Charles slammed his hand against the table, rattling the silverware. "You are a maid, Miss Caldwell. Do not insult my intelligence with fairy tales." The twins flinched at the sound, and Naomi instinctively stepped closer to them, her protective instinct overriding her fear. "Sir," she whispered, her voice trembling but earnest, "I swear I'm not lying. Something is happening. Whether you believe it or not, your sons are changing." Charles Montgomery III was not a man given to faith or sentiment. His empire was built on logic, precision, and control. He had spent millions over the years on specialists, experimental treatments, even surgeries, all of which had failed to restore his son's sight. And now, to think that some maid, some ordinary woman, could achieve what the world's top doctors could not, it was preposterous. Yet the twins' excitement was undeniable. Liam leaned forward, eyes shining. "Father, please believe us, we're not imagining it. Tonight when Naomi touched my eyes, I saw the way the firelight flickers. I saw it, Father." Charles stared at his sons, and for the briefest moment something flickered in his cold blue eyes. Not belief, not yet, but fear that something was happening beyond his control. Within 24 hours, the mansion was buzzing with activity. Charles called in a team of doctors from Johns Hopkins, insisting on immediate evaluations. "Run every test," he ordered curtly, his voice brooking no argument. "I want to know what's happening to my sons. Leave nothing unchecked." The doctors probed, scanned, and examined, their machines humming through the night. The twins endured it with patience, though their faces showed confusion. After hours of tests, the lead physician shook his head. "There's no medical explanation," he admitted. "Their optic nerves still show signs of congenital damage, yet their responses suggest they're beginning to process visual input." Charles's face darkened. "So you're telling me my sons are seeing without any scientific basis?" The doctor hesitated. "It appears so, perhaps psychosomatic, a trick of the mind." Charles's gaze turned cold. "Or perhaps someone is manipulating them." His eyes slid toward Naomi. The next morning, Naomi was summoned to the study. The room itself was intimidating, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk dominating the center. Charles sat behind it like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "Sit," he commanded. Naomi obeyed, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "I will ask you once, Miss Caldwell," Charles began, his voice even but dangerous. "What exactly have you been doing with my children?" Naomi took a shaky breath. "Nothing, sir. I comforted them when they were afraid. I told them stories. I placed my hands on their eyes just to calm them, and somehow they began to see." Charles leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Do you expect me to believe this is chance, that you, a maid, possess some power greater than science itself?" Her voice quivered, but she spoke the truth as she knew it. "I don't claim to understand it, sir. All I know is that it's real, and it's giving your sons hope they've never had." For a long moment, Charles said nothing. Then he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Hope is dangerous. Hope breeds weakness. I will not have false promises poisoning my sons." Naomi's heart sank, but her gaze remained steady. "Sir, with respect, what you call weakness is the very thing keeping them alive inside. They don't need more doctors. They need love. They need belief." The air crackled with tension. No one had spoken to Charles Montgomery like that in years. Later that night, when Naomi tucked the boys into bed, she found them both anxious. "Naomi, is father going to take you away from us?" Elias asked, his voice breaking. Naomi's throat tightened. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise I'll never leave you willingly." Liam reached for her hand. "Then you have to keep helping us, no matter what he says. Please, Naomi, you're the only one who believes in us." Tears filled Naomi's eyes. She knew the risk, but how could she deny them? While Charles interrogated Naomi and the doctors scrambled for explanations, one person remained curiously silent: Evangeline Montgomery. The boy's mother was a woman of delicate beauty and distant demeanor. She spent her days traveling, her nights at galas. But when news reached her that the twins claimed to be regaining sight, she returned unexpectedly. She entered the nursery late one evening, her perfume lingering in the air. The boys turned their heads at once. "Mother?" Liam asked cautiously. "Yes, darlings," Evangeline said, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. "I heard the most remarkable thing, that you've seen the world." Elias nodded eagerly. "It's true, Naomi helped us. We can see shapes, colors, it's like the world is waking up." Evangeline's painted lips curved into a smile, but her eyes betrayed unease. She glanced at Naomi, who stood quietly in the corner. "How curious," she murmured, "and how inconvenient." Naomi's stomach knotted. Something in the mother's tone felt wrong, not relief, not joy, but something darker. In the days that followed, pressure mounted. Charles monitored Naomi closely, forbidding her from spending unsupervised time with the boys. Doctors returned daily, running tests that yielded no new answers. The twins grew restless, their newfound vision fading when Naomi wasn't allowed near them. "Why won't father let you help us anymore?" Elias asked, tears streaming down his cheeks. Naomi brushed his hair back gently. "Because he doesn't understand. People fear what they can't explain, but we'll find a way, Elias, I promise." Her words lit a spark of determination in the boys. They refused to give up, and Naomi knew no matter the cost, neither could she. But what none of them realized was that this secret, fragile as it was, had already grown too big to contain. Word of the Montgomery twins' miracle was beginning to slip beyond the mansion walls. And in a world obsessed with wealth, power, and spectacle, miracles were never left in peace. Soon, Naomi would face not just the suspicion of her employers, but the scrutiny of the entire world. The Montgomery estate had always been vast, echoing with the footsteps of servants and the cold hum of silence. But now, silence has become unbearable. Every corridor seemed to whisper with tension. Naomi felt it most keenly. Since Charles's return, her every move was shadowed by suspicion. He had ordered that she no longer be left alone with the twins. Guards lingered outside the nursery door. Even Mrs. Delacroix followed her with hawk-like eyes. Yet in stolen moments, Naomi still found a way. One afternoon, while the boys napped in the sunlit conservatory, Naomi sat quietly between them. She placed her hands gently over their eyes. Elias gasped softly. "It's clearer today. I can see the glass ceiling, the way the sunlight bends through it." Liam grinned. "And the flowers, Naomi, are they purple? I see purple." Tears pricked Naomi's eyes. Their progress was undeniable, but the risk of discovery was greater than ever. "Promise me," she whispered, her voice urgent. "Don't tell anyone when I help you, not father, not mother, not the staff. They won't understand." The boys nodded solemnly. But Naomi knew their innocence would betray them sooner or later. Charles had grown restless. His empire had taught him one thing: everything could be controlled with enough force, money, or intellect. But this defied all logic. Late at night he paced the study, glass of scotch in hand. "If it isn't science, then what is it?" he muttered. "And why her? Why Naomi?" To him, miracles weren't blessings, they were threats. Threats to his order, threats to his authority. And the thought that a maid, a woman from a background he considered beneath his wealth, held power over his sons gnawed at him like poison. It was Evangeline, however, who revealed the cruelest truth. She confronted Naomi one evening in the upstairs corridor, her silk gown sweeping the marble floor. "You've grown too close to them," she said softly, though her tone was sharp as glass. Naomi stiffened. "They need someone, ma'am, someone who believes in them." Evangeline's painted lips curved in a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Belief is dangerous. Do you know why I keep my distance from those boys?" Naomi shook her head. Because I refuse to love what I might lose, Evangeline whispered, her voice chilling. Their blindness was a curse on this family, and if by some trick it is lifted, I will not be fooled into giving them my heart. Children bring weakness, weakness destroys. Naomi's chest tightened. They're your sons, they need you. Evangeline's eyes hardened. No, Miss Caldwell, they need discipline, and you... Her gaze swept over Naomi with disdain. You're making them believe in fantasies, you're making them dependent. That ends now. That night, Naomi sat alone in her quarters, clutching the small wooden cross her grandmother had given her. Memories came flooding back of the church in Baltimore where she had been raised, of her grandmother's whispered prayers, of the way she would lay hands on the sick and watch healing follow. Your hands carry fire, Naomi, her grandmother had once said. A gift passed down through our bloodline, but beware, gifts bring burdens. They draw envy, suspicion, even hatred. Use them with love and they will shine. Use them with fear and they will be destroyed. Naomi had never believed it fully, until now. Her hands, her gift, was this what her grandmother meant? Was she chosen in some way to bring light into darkness? One night, after everyone had retired, Elias crept out of bed, guiding Liam by the hand. They slipped quietly into Naomi's quarters, tears streaking their faces. Naomi, Elias whispered, shaking her awake. Father says he's sending you away tomorrow. We heard him. Please don't let him take you. Naomi's heart stopped. Sending me away. Liam clung to her arm. If you go, we'll be blind forever. Please help us one more time before morning. Naomi's chest ached. She pulled them close, her hands trembling as she placed them over their eyes. And as she prayed silently, light seemed to pour through her palms. Both boys gasped. I see it, Elias cried. Naomi, I see your face, your eyes, your tears. Liam's voice shook, and the candle flame, it's real, I see it flickering. Naomi wept, pressing her forehead against theirs. No matter what happens, never forget you are not broken, you are more than your blindness, never stop believing. The next morning, Charles stormed into Naomi's room, flanked by guards. The twins, caught trying to shield her, stood in defiance. Out of the way, Charles barked. No, Elias shouted, she's the reason we can see. Charles froze, his face twisting with rage and fear. He seized Naomi by the arm, dragging her forward. Enough of this witchcraft, you will leave this house today. Naomi's knees buckled, but she met his gaze with quiet strength. Sir, you can remove me from your house, but you cannot remove the truth. Your sons are seeing, and deep down you know it. Charles's grip tightened, his knuckles white. For a moment it looked as though he might strike her, but then, with a growl, he released her. Get her out of my sight. As Naomi was led away, the twins clung to each other, their voices breaking with sobs. For the first time in years, Charles Montgomery felt powerless. His wealth, his authority, his empire, none of it could explain or control what was happening. And yet, somewhere deep within his heart, a whisper began to stir, not belief, not yet, but the first crack in the walls he had built around himself. What none of them knew was that this was not the end of Naomi's place in their lives, only the beginning of a battle that would test love, faith, and the very meaning of sight itself. The Montgomery mansion had always been a fortress of wealth, marble walls shielding its inhabitants from the world outside. But in the days following Naomi's forced removal, those walls felt colder than ever. Elias and Liam sat in silence more often now, their small hands clasped tightly as if afraid that if they let go of each other they would lose the last thread of hope Naomi had left them with. She promised she wouldn't leave us, Elias whispered one evening as rain pattered against the nursery window, his voice cracked like fragile glass. She didn't leave us, Liam said stubbornly, though his throat ached with grief. Father took her away. But both boys knew the truth. Naomi's laughter no longer filled the halls, her soft humming no longer comforted them at night. The world, which had begun to brighten with colors and shapes, once again seemed to fade into shadow. Charles Montgomery sat alone in his study, a fire crackling in the great hearth. Papers lay scattered across his desk, but he ignored them. His mind was consumed with images he could not dismiss. His sons crying out for Naomi, their small voices breaking as they insisted they had seen. He had dismissed it all as manipulation, trickery, anything but truth, yet his sons' words haunted him. Your tie, it's dark blue, isn't it? The chandelier, it sparkles like stars. They had described things they could not have known, not by chance, not by imagination. Charles clenched his glass of scotch so tightly his knuckles turned white. If it is true, if she somehow gave them sight. The thought chilled him, because it meant he, with all his wealth, power, and influence, had been helpless where a maid had succeeded. In Charles Montgomery, I despised feeling powerless. Evangeline, however, wore triumph like perfume. To her, Naomi's removal was not just necessary, it was inevitable. She had watched from the shadows long enough to see the way the twins clung to the maid, how their fragile little hearts beat for her approval. And that terrified her. Love, in Evangeline's world, was a weakness. She had trained herself long ago to view her children not as blessings but as burdens, constant reminders of imperfection in a life that demanded flawless appearances. In the grand salon, she stood before a mirror adjusting her pearl necklace. Her reflection stared back, beautiful but hollow. "They'll forget her," she murmured to herself. "Children are resilient, they'll adapt, and soon they'll learn who truly controls their lives." But Evangeline underestimated one thing: the depth of the boy's bond with Naomi. Days turned into weeks. Naomi's absence grew heavier, like a silence that suffocated. The twins' vision, once slowly blossoming, began to blur again. Without Naomi's touch, the miracle dimmed. "I can't see it anymore," Elias admitted one morning, tears brimming in his eyes. He had been staring at the garden where he once swore he'd seen the roses in full bloom. Now nothing. Liam bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. "It's because they took her away, they don't want us to see." The bitterness in his young voice startled even Elias. That night, when the house was cloaked in darkness, the twins made a pact. "We'll find Naomi again," Liam whispered fiercely, "even if Father doesn't want us to, even if no one helps us." And in their hearts a rebellion was born. Meanwhile, Naomi sat in a small, cramped apartment across town. After being expelled from the Montgomery estate, she had returned to her modest life, but her thoughts never left the twins. Each night she clutched her grandmother's cross, whispering their names in prayer. "Elias, Liam, let them know they are loved, let them keep believing." She missed them more than she could bear. Their laughter, their endless questions, the way their faces lit up when they described the world beginning to appear. And deep down, she feared for them. Not just because they had lost her touch, but because she had seen the coldness in Charles's eyes, the emptiness in Evangeline's smile. "They're not safe in that house," she thought, "not truly." Rumors had already begun to spread outside the mansion. Whispers of a miracle. The wealthy elite who dined with Charles Montgomery wanted to know more. At charity galas, Evangeline was cornered with questions. "I heard your sons are regaining sight, is it true? What treatment did you find? Surely not one of those experimental surgeries again. Or was it the maid?" That last question always made Evangeline's jaw tighten. Charles, meanwhile, deflected with vague answers. "We're exploring possibilities, nothing is confirmed," but the pressure mounted. Investors, journalists, even medical researchers began circling, hungry for a story. One evening, a headline appeared in a prominent paper. "Montgomery twins rumored to regain sight, a miracle or myth." Charles threw the paper into the fire, but it was too late. The story was out. And once the world smelled a miracle, it would not stop until it found the source. Inside the mansion, tension reached a breaking point. The boys grew more defiant. They refused meals, rejected tutors, and demanded Naomi's return. "If you don't bring her back, we'll never forgive you," Liam shouted at his father during dinner one night. His small fists clenched in fury, his eyes wet with frustrated tears. Charles's face darkened, but for once he did not strike the table or raise his voice. He only stared at his sons, silent, as though something inside him was unraveling. Evangeline, however, seethed. "Ungrateful brats," she hissed once Charles left the room. "Do you not realize what you have? You live in a palace and yet you cry for a servant. Pathetic." The boys turned away, refusing to answer her. That night, Elias whispered in the dark, "Liam, what if we run away? What if we find Naomi ourselves?" The idea was reckless, dangerous, but in their young hearts it felt like the only way. The breaking point came during a visit from the doctors. For hours they ran tests, shining lights into the boys' eyes, asking them to describe shapes and colors. But without Naomi, their answers faltered. I can't see it anymore, Elias admitted, his voice breaking. Dr. Halbrook scribbled notes with a grim expression. Regression, he muttered. Without consistent stimulus, their progress is revering. Charles's jaw tightened. Rage simmered beneath his calm exterior. Rage at the failure of science, at the whispers of society, at the memory of Naomi's steady voice saying, they don't need more doctors, they need love. That night, after the boys were put to bed, Charles sat in his study once more. His hands shook as he poured another glass of scotch. He stared into the fire and whispered words he had not spoken in decades. God, if you're real, if you gave them sight through her, then what does that make me? The fire crackled, offering no answer. But for the first time, Charles Montgomery III felt something he had spent his life suppressing. Not anger, not pride. Fear. The next day, Elias fell ill. His small body shook with fever, his breath shallow. Doctors rushed in, prescribing medicines, running tests, but nothing seemed to help. Naomi's absence weighed heavier than ever. As Elias tossed and turned, delirious, he cried out her name. Naomi, don't leave us, Naomi. Liam sat by his brother's side, tears streaming down his face. Please, Naomi, come back, we need you. The staff whispered nervously in the halls. Some believed Elias' sickness was merely physical. Others whispered darker things. It's punishment, one maid said under her breath. They took Naomi away and now the boy suffers. Mrs. Delacroix silenced her sharply, but the whispers spread. And when Charles stood in the doorway of his son's room, watching Elias shiver and call for Naomi, something inside him shattered. He realized then what money could not buy, what doctors could not cure, what even his iron will could not control. Love. It was Naomi's love, her belief, her gift that had given his sons hope, and without her, that hope was dying. Charles turned away, his chest heaving with a mixture of pride and despair. He had built an empire of steel and glass, but what good was it if his sons withered before his eyes? That night, Charles made a decision that would change everything. Far across town, Naomi was startled by a knock at her apartment door. She hesitated, heart pounding, before opening it. On the threshold stood Charles Montgomery. His expensive suit was rumpled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. For a moment neither spoke, the silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Finally Charles said, his voice rough, my son is dying, he calls for you. Naomi's breath caught. Elias. Charles nodded once, and for the first time the billionaire's cold mask cracked, his eyes glistened with something Naomi never thought she'd see. Desperation. Please, he whispered, come back. And that was how Naomi Caldwell, once cast out as a fraud, stepped back into the Montgomery mansion, not as a servant but as the only hope left. The storm was far from over. Suspicion, envy, and fear still lingered in every corner of that house. But for the first time, Charles Montgomery had opened the door. And once hope was let back in, nothing could stop what was coming next. The Montgomery mansion had never felt so tense. Every gilded wall, every polished marble floor seemed to hold its breath as Naomi stepped back through the doors. The servants froze. Some whispered prayers of thanks under their breath, others widened their eyes in shock, unsure how long she would last this time. Naomi's heart pounded, but she kept her chin lifted. This was not the same young woman who had been thrown out like yesterday's garbage. No, this was a woman carrying the desperate plea of 2 children in her soul. At the top of the staircase, Liam stood, trembling. The moment his ears caught her familiar footsteps, he bolted down the stairs. Naomi, he cried, his voice breaking as he hurled himself into her arms. She caught him, clutching him tightly, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Oh, my sweet boy, I'm here, I'm here. Then a weak, fragile voice echoed down the hallway. Naomi. Elias. His small frame appeared at the end of the corridor, leaning heavily against the banister, his face pale and sickly. The moment she opened her arms, he stumbled forward and she rushed to meet him. Elias collapsed against her chest, sobbing. I thought you left forever, he whispered. Never, Naomi said fiercely, brushing his damp hair from his forehead. No matter what happens, I will always come back for you. Charles Montgomery stood in the shadows of the hallway, his jaw tight, his hands clenched behind his back. He had brought Naomi back, yes, but the sight of his sons clinging to her as if she were life itself made something burn inside him. Was it jealousy, regret? He could not tell. All he knew was that she had power here, more power than he had ever allowed anyone to hold. That night, Naomi refused to leave Elias' bedside. She sang softly her grandmother's hymn, stroking his hair until his fevered body relaxed. Liam curled up on the other side of the bed, unwilling to let go of her hand. For the first time in weeks, the boys slept soundly. And when dawn broke, something extraordinary happened. "Naomi," Elias whispered, blinking at the golden light filtering through the curtains. His voice trembled. "The sun, it's so bright." Naomi's breath caught. "Can you see it?" He nodded weakly, a smile tugging at his lips. "It looks like fire." Liam gasped. "I see it too. Naomi, we can see it again." Tears blurred Naomi's own vision as she pressed her forehead against theirs. "Yes, my loves, hold on to it, don't let go." The miracle had returned. Word spread quickly through the mansion. By the second day of Naomi's return, Elias was strong enough to sit up, his color returning, his eyes clearer. "She saved them," one maid whispered in awe. "She's the reason they can see," another insisted. Even Mrs. Delacroix, ever cautious, crossed herself when she passed Naomi in the hallway. But Evangeline was far from convinced. She stood in the doorway of the nursery, arms folded, watching Naomi cradle Liam as he laughed at the flickering shadows cast by the fireplace. "They're children," Evangeline said coldly. "Children imagine what they want to see. Do not fool yourself into believing you're some kind of miracle worker." Naomi lifted her gaze, meeting the mistress's icy eyes without flinching. "Call it what you want, but your sons are healing, and it isn't because of doctors, it's because of love." The word struck Evangeline like a slap. Love, a word she had long considered a weakness, now thrown at her like a weapon. "You will regret this," Evangeline whispered before sweeping out of the room. But Naomi was unshaken. For the first time, she knew she was not fighting alone. Meanwhile, Charles wrestled with himself. He had spent a lifetime commanding men, building empires, silencing competitors. Yet here, under his own roof, he felt like a stranger. His sons looked at Naomi with adoration he had never earned. Late one night, he entered the nursery quietly. Naomi sat by the fire, both boys asleep, her hand still resting protectively on Elias' chest. Charles studied her in silence, the way she carried herself, humble yet unyielding, the way the boys clung to her as if she were oxygen. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "Tell me the truth, how are they seeing?" Naomi turned her head, her eyes steady. "Because I believe they can, because I love them enough to fight for what no one else will. That's something money can't buy, Mr. Montgomery." His jaw tightened. "You think love is enough?" She glanced at the twins, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. "It's more than enough, it's everything." Charles had no response. For the first time in his life, he realized his fortune, vast as it was, could not compare to what she offered with empty hands. But outside the mansion, storm clouds gathered. The newspapers grew more persistent. Rumors of the miracle twins spread like wildfire. Some journalists camped outside the gates, desperate for a glimpse. Others began digging into Naomi's past, her family, her beliefs. And when whispers reached Evangeline that the press was calling Naomi the miracle maid, something inside her snapped. "She will not steal my sons, she will not humiliate this family," Evangeline hissed to her husband one evening. Charles barely looked up from his desk. "Without her, Elias would be dead." "Without her, our reputation is at stake," Evangeline shot back. "Do you not see it? They'll paint her as some saint and us as cruel monsters who cast her out. Is that what you want?" Charles rose from his chair, his eyes blazing. "What I want is for my sons to live." Evangeline recoiled, stunned. In all their years of marriage, she had never seen her husband choose anyone over appearances. And in that moment, she knew she was losing. The following week, Charles did the unthinkable. He summoned the doctors, the lawyers, even the family's personal chaplain. Naomi stood at his side as he declared, "My sons are regaining their sight. It is not due to medicine nor wealth but to the care of Naomi Caldwell." From this day forward, she will remain under this roof not as a servant but as guardian to Elias and Liam. The words sent shockwaves through the room. Naomi gasped softly, stunned. She had come expecting another dismissal, another punishment. Instead, Charles had legitimized her place in the boys' lives. The chaplain nodded gravely. Perhaps this is not science but providence. The doctors exchanged uneasy glances, unwilling to argue with results they could not explain. But Evangeline, she sat in silence, her hands curled into fists so tight her nails cut into her skin. Her world perfect, polished, untouchable was slipping away. And in her heart a seed of hatred bloomed. For the twins, however, Naomi's return was salvation. Their days were filled with laughter again, their progress astounding. They began to describe colors more vividly, to recognize shapes, to chase after shadows as though discovering life itself for the first time. One evening, as Naomi read to them by the fire, Elias looked up suddenly. "Naomi," he said softly, "are you an angel?" Naomi smiled, brushing back his hair. "No, my love, I'm just someone who believes in you." But deep inside, she knew the truth. What was happening here was not just natural. It was something greater, something that would challenge not only the Montgomery family but the entire world. Because miracles do not stay hidden forever. By the time winter's first snow blanketed the estate, Naomi had restored more than sight to the twins. She had given them joy, hope, and courage. But every miracle has its price. And soon, the world beyond the gates would demand theirs. Snow blanketed the Montgomery estate like a fragile veil, pure and unbroken, hiding the turmoil beneath. Inside, however, the mansion pulsed with tension. Naomi's return had brought healing, yes, but it had also ignited battles no one could ignore. The twins thrived under her care. Their laughter rang through the halls again, their vision sharper each day. They could now distinguish the colors of the curtains, the outlines of faces, the flicker of candle flames. For the first time in their lives, they were living, not just existing. But with each small miracle, the world outside grew hungrier. Reporters camped at the gates, their cameras flashing whenever the iron doors creaked open. Headlines flooded newspapers. The Montgomery miracle, blind twins see again. Mystery Maid restores sight, doctors baffled. Is this science or something more? The Montgomery name, once synonymous with wealth and power, was now tied to whispers of the supernatural. Investors called, skeptical yet intrigued. Medical institutions demanded explanations. And the church declared it an act of God. For Charles Montgomery, this attention was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, his sons lived. On the other, his empire teetered under scrutiny. Every gala, every meeting was haunted by one burning question: how? And the answer always led back to Naomi. Evangeline could not bear it. Once she had been the flawless socialite, her beauty and status untouchable. Now, at every gathering, she felt the sting of invisible daggers. Women whispered behind jeweled fans. Men eyed her with contempt. "She cast the girl out," they murmured. "Imagine throwing away the very one who saved her children." Evangeline's face, always perfectly painted, began to crack under the weight of humiliation. At night, in the silence of her grand dressing room, she hurled perfumes against the wall, shattered mirrors, screamed into velvet cushions. "Thief," she spat, staring at her reflection. "That maid stole everything, my children, my husband's loyalty, my place in this house." But deep down, Evangeline knew the truth. Naomi hadn't stolen anything. She had simply given what Evangeline had never known how to give: love. One stormy evening, the inevitable happened. The gates, swarmed with reporters, were forced open as a bold journalist broke through. Cameras flashed wildly as he shouted, "Naomi, Naomi Caldwell, did you heal the Montgomery twins? Are you responsible for this miracle?" Naomi froze. She had been walking the boys in the garden, their hands snug in hers. The flashbulbs frightened them. They clung tighter, burying their faces against her dress. Charles rushed out, his security team pushing back the crowd. "Get off my property," he thundered. But it was too late. Photographs of Naomi shielding the boys from the frenzy spread like wildfire across the nation. The world had seen her, and there would be no turning back. The Montgomery family was summoned to court, not for crime but for inquiry. Medical boards demanded testimony. Religious leaders insisted on statements. The media dubbed it the miracle trial. The courtroom overflowed. On one side, scientists eager to disprove the claims. On the other, believers calling Naomi a vessel of divine power. Charles sat at the front, grim and commanding, but all eyes were on Naomi, who sat quietly with the twins beside her. When the judge called her forward, the room fell silent. "Miss Caldwell," the judge said, peering over his spectacles, "do you claim to have healed these children?" Naomi shook her head softly. "No, Your Honor, I only loved them. I only believed they could see when no one else did." The courtroom murmured. "And yet," the judge continued, "medical experts confirm their sight is returning. How do you explain this?" Naomi turned to the twins, who sat straight-backed, their small hands intertwined. She smiled gently. "Perhaps love heals more than we know." The words, simple as they were, pierced through the crowd. Even the skeptical fell into thoughtful silence. Evangeline, seated at the back, nearly choked on her own rage. She had hoped this public spectacle would humiliate Naomi, discredit her. Instead, it elevated her. By the time the trial ended, Naomi was no longer just a maid. She was a symbol, a reminder of hope in a world consumed by greed and doubt. The court made no official ruling on the miracle. It could not be explained nor dismissed. But one truth was clear: Naomi Caldwell had changed the Montgomery family forever. Returning home that evening, Charles called Naomi into his study. The fire glowed dimly, shadows dancing across the walls. "You've made me look weak," he said flatly. Naomi stiffened. "That was never my intention." "And yet," Charles continued, pouring a drink with shaking hands, "you've given my sons what I could not. You've given them life, and I owe you everything." Naomi blinked, stunned. Charles's voice cracked, for the first time stripped of arrogance. "Do you know what it feels like to have more money than kings yet still be powerless to save your own children?" Her eyes softened. "Yes, because money cannot buy faith, and faith is what saved them." Charles turned toward the fire, swallowing hard. In that moment, he was not a billionaire, not a titan of industry, just a father brought to his knees by truth. The days that followed reshaped the Montgomery mansion. Naomi was no longer treated as a servant but as family. The boys refused to sleep without her nearby, their laughter chasing away the ghosts that had once haunted the halls. Charles softened too. He began to spend evenings with his sons, learning the simple joy of listening to their discoveries. For the first time, he saw them not as heirs but as children. And Evangeline. Her downfall was quiet but complete. Invitations to society balls dwindled. Her friends abandoned her, unwilling to be associated with the woman who had shunned the very source of her children's salvation. One bitter winter morning, she packed her things. Without a word, she left the mansion, her pearls and gowns trailing behind her like remnants of a forgotten life. The twins asked once where their mother had gone. Charles, after a long silence, simply said she chose a different path, and they never asked again. Months later, spring arrived. The gardens bloomed, the air alive with the scent of roses. The twins, now strong and healthy, ran through the estate with Naomi at their side. Their eyes, once clouded by darkness, now sparkled with light. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the great oak tree, Elias turned to Naomi with a question. "Why did you stay, even when Father sent you away, even when everyone doubted you? Why didn't you give up on us?" Naomi smiled, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "Because love doesn't give up, not on the people it's meant for." Liam leaned against her shoulder, his voice soft. "Then we'll never give up on you either." Her heart swelled. In their words, in their trust, she found her true reward. Years passed. The twins grew into young men, their sight fully restored. The story of their healing became legend, studied by scientists, preached by pastors, whispered about in awe. But for Elias and Liam, the true miracle was never in their eyes. It was in the woman who refused to let them live in darkness. And for Naomi, the miracle was not in what she gave, but in what she received. A family bound not by blood but by love stronger than any force in the world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the twins asked Naomi a question they had asked years ago. "Naomi," Elias said, his voice warm with gratitude, "are you an angel?" Naomi laughed softly, her eyes shining. No, my love, I'm just someone who believed in you. But to them and to the world that watched their story unfold, she was far more than that. She was proof that miracles live not in wealth nor in science but in love unyielding and unafraid. And that truth would never be forgotten.